First-class storm. The day Baron Trump gave up his seat to a legend. The cabin pulsed with the low murmur of conversation, a symphony of rustling newspapers, clinking glasses, and tired sighs. First-class passengers, stoic businessmen in charcoal suits, over-perfumed socialites, weary travelers pretending not to care, settled into their plush cocoons of privilege. Baron Trump, tall, composed, a quiet presence at just 18, sat by the window. He scanned the in-flight menu with the casual detachment of someone used to comfort. Outside, the runway shimmered in the afternoon heat. Inside, everything seemed just as expected. Until he walked in. A hush. Heads turned. Then came the whispers, like wind rustling dry leaves. Is that? No way. That's him. Rocky. Rambo. Stallone. And there he was, Sylvester Stallone, stepping into the cabin like a man entering a battlefield. Age had weathered his face into something carved from stone, but his presence? Undiminished. His eyes, dark and searching, scanned the rows. He looked like someone carrying 1,000 stories and maybe one too many regrets. Baron looked up. His eyes met Stallone's for a brief, electric second. A murmured conversation between Stallone's assistant and the flight attendant broke the moment. Something about a seat mix-up. First class was full. Stallone had been bumped to coach. The idea alone seemed absurd. And before anyone else could react, Baron stood. No hesitation. No theatrics. He just rose, walked forward, and said, "Mr. Stallone, take my seat." A ripple of shock rolled through the cabin. Stallone blinked. His face didn't move, but something flickered behind his eyes. His voice, deep and rasped like gravel rolling in honey, came low and deliberate. "Kid, you sure about that?" Baron nodded, unflinching. Completely. The silence that followed was thick. Even the champagne bubbles seemed to freeze mid-rise. With the slow, deliberate grace of a man used to facing down chaos, Stallone placed a hand on the armrest. His fingers curled around the leather, and he sat. He didn't just sit, he landed, as though he hadn't rested in years. "You didn't have to do this," he said, voice softer now. Grateful. Almost stunned. Baron gave a half-smile. "I wanted to." In the economy cabin, Jaws dropped as Baron Trump. Yes, that Baron Trump slipped into a narrow middle seat, flanked by a red-faced salesman jabbering about crypto and a screaming toddler waving a soggy animal cracker. And yet, Baron didn't flinch. He put on his headphones, leaned back, and closed his eyes. The luxury he'd given up? Forgotten. Back in first class, Stallone sat still, too still. He stared ahead, then pulled out a small, battered notebook. His fingers hovered over the page, then began to move, scratching lines, thoughts, memories, inspiration sparked by one strange, beautiful act. Something inside him stirred. Then boom. Turbulence. The seatbelt signs flickered like dying fireflies. The plane bucked once, hard, and a collective gasp tore through the cabin. Drinks spilled. Trays rattled. A baby wailed. Somewhere, someone screamed. Baron gripped the armrest of his narrow seat, his expression calm, but his eyes darted. Around him, passengers clutched seats, rosaries, each other. The salesman had gone white. The toddler shrieked. And Stallone? He froze mid-thought. The plane jerked again, harder. His coffee flew from the tray, splashing onto his jeans. He didn't notice. He was staring past the curtain, toward the back of the plane. Toward Baron. The intercom crackled to life, the pilot's voice trying for calm, but failing. "We've hit an unexpected storm system, severe turbulence. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." It wasn't just turbulence. It was mayhem. The kind of shaking that made even veterans of the skies reach for prayers they'd forgotten. Stallone's fingers dug into the armrests. Not fear, no, not exactly. But something primal. Something that whispered, "This isn't normal." He closed his eyes for half a breath and pictured Baron again, this kid, this stranger, who had given up safety and silence to sit beside chaos. Why? What kind of kid does that? As the plane rocked and groaned, 35,000 feet above a storm-soaked earth, two men, one a living legend, the other just beginning, rode the same sky, caught in the same storm, bound now by something more than chance. Something, like destiny. The sky roared like a wounded beast. The plane bucked, jolted, groaned, a tin bird tossed by invisible fists. Somewhere above the Atlantic, lives hung in suspension. Not just bodies, but futures, dreams, names. Baron Trump sat frozen in place, his knuckles pale against the frayed fabric of the armrest. Each jolt reverberated through his chest like a war drum. Across the cabin, prayers whispered like wind through trees. A child whimpered. An old man clutched a stranger's hand. And the once chatty salesman beside Baron? Mute now. Lips clenched. Eyes shut. His bravado had evaporated mid-turbulence. Back in first class, where the lights flickered like nervous stars, Sylvester Stallone stared out the window, watching lightning trace silver scars across the heavens. His jaw clenched. Not from fear. He was no stranger to chaos, but from something deeper. Something stirring. Baron's gesture. Giving up his seat. That act, quiet and without fanfare, had lodged itself in Sylvester's mind like a pebble in a boot. He had played warriors, fighters, legends. But now, he saw the real thing. And it sat back in coach. The turbulence eased. Like a held breath finally released. A hush settled over the cabin. A fragile calm, like glass balancing on a wire. Sylvester unbuckled. Slowly, purposefully. He stood, swayed, steadied himself against the seat back. Murmurs rose. Is that? No way. Stallone. The Hollywood titan, heavy brow, leather skin, eyes that had seen too much, made his way down the aisle like a man on a mission. Past first class. Past business. Into economy. He stopped. Row 27. Baron looked up, blinking, stunned into silence. Sylvester smiled, just a little. Enough to melt the ice. Mind if I sit for a while? He asked, voice gravelly but warm, the kind of tone that made grown men listen. Baron stammered. Of course. Yeah. Gasps and cell phone cameras snapped from all directions. The actor slid into the cramped seat beside him. The space was tight, almost comically so, but Sylvester didn't care. He leaned in, elbows tucked, eyes sincere. A beat. Then, so, Sylvester said, gesturing vaguely toward the back of the plane. Why'd you give up your seat? Baron shrugged, suddenly shy. Seemed right. You've given a lot to people, your films, your story. I figured, why not give something back? Sylvester chuckled, a low, gritty sound full of surprise and humility. That's a first. Usually people ask me for autographs, not aisle seats. Baron grinned. It's not about the seat. It's about the gesture. The moment. A silence fell between them, thick and meaningful. Sylvester looked at the ceiling, then back at Baron. His voice, when it came, was quieter. Honest. People look at me like I've got it all figured out. Fame. Fortune. The whole package. But sometimes, I wonder if I've made a difference. Where it counts. Baron tilted his head. His voice was steady now, almost wise. You have. You do. Even now, sitting here. You inspire people without even realizing it. Sylvester's expression shifted, softening. Vulnerable. He studied the young man like he was seeing something rare. All around them, passengers eavesdropped shamelessly. Heads turned. Hearts stirred. It wasn't just talk. It was truth, unvarnished and raw, unfolding in real time. A flight attendant, trying to act casual, whispered to another. That's Stallone. With the Trump kid. In economy. No way. Cameras clicked. Discreet. But not unnoticed. The two men kept talking, quietly, intensely. About everything. Legacy. Purpose. The weight of expectation. The cost of attention. Baron spoke of wanting something real. A life of service, not spectacle. Sylvester answered with stories of hardship, of climbing from the gutters of his past to the glow of the marquee. And as the plane began its descent, wheels down, seatbelts clicked, the actor reached into his jacket and pulled out a small notepad. Here, he said, scribbling. Phone. Email. Let's keep talking. Baron nodded, eyes glistening. He stood to shake the man's hand, but Sylvester pulled him in. A solid clasp, a warrior's grip. You reminded me of something today, Stallone said, voice thick. It's not about where you sit, it's who you sit with. Baron smiled, his voice almost a whisper. Thanks, Mr. Stallone. You reminded me too. The plane touched down. Tires screeched. A pause, then cheers. Applause erupted. Real. Spontaneous. Raw. Passengers stood, clapping. Some wiped away tears. Others grinned like kids on Christmas morning. As Sylvester and Baron walked into the terminal side by side, the storm, the one in the clouds, and the one in their hearts, had passed. And all that remained was connection. Within minutes, seconds, really, the internet did what it does best. It exploded. One blurry photo. A caption. A storm of reposts. And suddenly, The story of a young man's quiet gesture and an icon's unexpected humility became the moment of the day. Then the week, maybe the year. The post came from a flight attendant. Just a few heartfelt lines. But they hit like a thunderclap. Baron Trump gave up his first-class seat for Sylvester Stallone. What followed? A conversation that reminded everyone of what it means to be human. Still shaking. The hashtags trended before their plane even taxied to the gate. Outside the terminal, reporters clustered like vultures in heels and suits, mics and camera flashes in hand, hungry for a quote, a glance, a headline. Baron froze at the terminal door, eyes wide at the chaos beyond. But Sylvester, ever the screen warrior, always the protector, stepped in front of him like a human shield. He raised a hand, calm but commanding. No comments for now. No one dared argue. They slipped into the waiting black SUV. The doors shut. Silence, blessed silence. Sylvester turned to the young man, eyes twinkling with a mix of mischief and gravity. You ready for this? Baron blinked. A slow, incredulous grin spread across his face. He shook his head, laughing breathlessly. Not even close. Sylvester chuckled, a deep, reassuring rumble. You'll be fine, kid. You've got something most people never get. You've got heart. That's the one thing you can't fake. Outside, the media spun stories. But inside that car, something real was beginning. Bigger than a viral post. Deeper than fame. That night, Baron's phone became a symphony of buzzes. Notifications piled like snow. Texts from friends. Messages from family, his parents glowing with pride. Comments from total strangers. Thank you for reminding us there's still good out there. You made me cry on my lunch break. Faith in humanity, restored. But one call made him sit up straight. A number he didn't recognize. He answered cautiously. Hello. That voice. Rough, unmistakable, full of gravel and gravity. Baron, it's Sylvester. Got a minute? Baron snapped to attention. Of course. There was a pause, then a sincerity that hit like a gut punch. I've been thinking. About what we talked about. About the world. About kindness. I've had this film in my head for years. A story about how small things, tiny, quiet moments, can ripple out and change everything. He exhaled slowly. I think it's time to make it. And I want you in it. Baron blinked. Me? But I'm not an actor. You don't need to be. Sylvester's voice was smiling now. You are the story. I just need your truth. Baron was quiet, his thoughts spinning like a wheel in a storm. Then he heard it again, that line from the plane. The one that stuck. It's not about where you sit. It's about who you sit with. He breathed out. I'd be honored. The next week, Baron stepped into a world he never thought he'd enter, Stallone's studio. It was part museum, part war room. Posters lined the walls. Awards glinted from shelves. But at the center of it all sat the man himself. No spotlight, no pretense. Just paper, coffee, and purpose. Sylvester looked up and smiled. Let's start simple. What moved you that day? Why give up your seat? Baron hesitated, choosing his words carefully. I guess. I believe in the little things. They matter. More than people think. Sylvester nodded, scribbling. Kindness begins with the little things. That's the heartbeat of the whole film. They talked for hours. Built characters. Wove threads. One story became 5. Then 10. Interconnected lives sparked by tiny acts of grace. A mechanic fixing a stranger's tire. A child offering his lunch. A nurse staying past her shift. It wasn't about stunts or showdowns. It was about humans. As dusk crept over the city, Baron glanced at Sylvester. The legend was hunched over notes, eyes alight, alive. This wasn't just another movie. This was personal. And Baron realized he wasn't just learning to tell stories. He was watching a master pour his soul into something that mattered. Not for fame, not for fans, but for change. Weeks turned into months. And the project, still unnamed, still unfinished, began to pulse with life. Their unlikely partnership, once sparked by a plane ride, became something sacred. A bridge between generations. A conversation turned collaboration. A moment turned movement. And as they worked, the world outside leaned in, waiting for what they'd create. Not a blockbuster. Not a spectacle. But a story the world desperately needed to hear. The room was quiet, the kind of quiet that speaks. In Sylvester Stallone's office, dimly lit, heavy with history, Baron's eyes drifted to a photograph on the wall. It wasn't glamorous. No tuxedos, no trophies, no spotlights. Just a boy, his arm hugged close by his father, his mother's smile like sunlight captured in a still frame. Sylvester followed his gaze. His voice, when it came, was low, rough, reverent. "That's the last picture I ever took with them," he said. "They didn't have much, but they gave me everything I needed to live a good life. Not just," he trailed off, eyes clouded with memory. Baron stood silently, hands folded, heart full. Then, softly, almost afraid to ask, "How proud do you think they'd be of the man you've become?" Sylvester turned, and for a beat, he didn't speak. His eyes shimmered, not from tears, but from the ache of time, of loss, of love. "Proud?" he whispered, nodding slowly. "Maybe. But more than that, I hope they'd say I remembered what matters." That moment etched itself into the walls. Not with ink, but with meaning. Word of the film had already leaked. The press, always hungry, circled. But what caught fire wasn't scandal or gossip. It was wonder. Wonder that Sylvester Stallone, the ultimate Hollywood fighter, had teamed up with Baron Trump, a young man once seen only in shadows of his family's fame, to create something human, and not just any film. The Power of One. A title simple as breath. A message urgent as fire. Social media buzzed. Fans speculated. Critics braced. But what they didn't expect was the soul behind the spectacle. 5 stories. 5 lives. Each one sparked by a single, ordinary act of kindness, one stranger offering warmth to another. The chain reaction of compassion. The ripple that becomes a wave. Behind the scenes, Sylvester directed like a man possessed, with precision, intensity, and an open heart. Baron, often unseen but never unfelt, was there in the background, offering ideas, shaping character arcs, pulling from real moments. One scene, loosely drawn from their flight, showed an older man giving up his last comfort to help a frightened, exhausted young boy. That moment didn't just move the crew. It broke them. "This one's for you, kid," Sylvester had whispered on set, watching the cameras roll as Baron stood just outside the shot, hand over his mouth, eyes brimming. The night of the premiere arrived like thunder wrapped in velvet. The theater overflowed with faces, celebrities in black tie, critics with sharpened pens, fans with glowing eyes. Baron sat next to Sylvester in the front row, nerves dancing in his veins. "Relax," Stallone said, squeezing his shoulder. "You lived it. We just filmed it." The lights dimmed, and the screen came alive. Gasps. Laughter. Silence so pure you could hear a heartbeat. Each story struck a different chord, but the harmony was undeniable. Every act of kindness ignited something in the audience, memories, regrets, hope. Then came the final scene. A gesture of forgiveness so raw, so real, it carved silence into the room. Grown men wept quietly. Women clutched tissues. Even the critics forgot their notepads. And when the credits rolled, the applause was thunderous. But Stallone didn't bask in it. No triumphant poses. No center stage bow. Instead, he turned to Baron and whispered, "Come on. This is your moment too." He pulled the young man up beside him, turned to the crowd, and lifted the mic. "This young man right here," he said, his voice echoing through the theater like gospel, "reminded me why stories matter. He reminded me that the small things, things you think no one sees, can change the world." Baron's cheeks flushed deep red. The applause grew louder, more insistent, more grateful. In that instant, he realized what had happened. A small choice on a turbulent flight had looped back into something vast, beautiful, and real. A circle closed. A legacy born. In the days that followed, the world lit up. The Power of One wasn't just a hit. It was a phenomenon. Critics called it Stallone's most intimate, most mature, most emotionally devastating work to date. Audiences around the globe lined up not for explosions or car chases, but for healing, for truth. Social feeds flooded with stories. "I called my dad after watching. Helped a stranger today. Because of this movie. Kindness is contagious." And Baron? He found himself somewhere he never expected, not in the shadows of a name, but in the light of his own voice. Because sometimes, one seat, one gesture, one conversation at 30,000 feet is all it takes to set the world on fire with compassion. Baron couldn't believe what was happening. The morning after the premiere, the world was glowing with kindness. Not in headlines or press releases, but in people. Ordinary, everyday people. Twitter lit up with hashtag the power of one. A barista bought coffee for the next 5 customers. A teenager shoveled snow for an elderly neighbor. No charge, no camera. Old friends reconciled. Letters were written. Forgiveness was given. Strangers were seen. A wave had begun, and it was real. But the moment that struck Baron hardest came not from the public, not from the spotlight, but from his phone. His mother's voice cracked through the receiver. "We're so proud of you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. And then his father, stoic, steady, added simply, "You did well, son." That was all. But it hit like a cathedral bell in Baron's heart. He sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the phone like it was a sacred relic. For the first time in his life, he felt it, not the weight of legacy, but the lift of becoming his own story. He reached for a pen, paper. The world was changing, and now he was ready to change with it. He would write, create, live his story. Because kindness, he learned, wasn't something to talk about. It was something to do. A few weeks later, another moment arrived, unexpected and beautiful. An invitation from Sylvester. A private screening. At a children's hospital. When Baron called to thank him, the veteran actor's voice was soft. They could use some inspiration. The small auditorium flickered to life with the glow of the projector. Children in wheelchairs, beds, and beanbags leaned forward as the film unfolded. Their faces lit with triumph, dimmed with heartbreak. Some cried, some laughed, but all of them felt. When the credits rolled, there was no applause, just the kind of silence that means something. Sylvester and Baron stayed to answer questions. One little boy, no older than 10, raised his hand with timid determination. If the boy in the film could meet the old man again, he paused, voice soft, hopeful. Does he ever see him again? Sylvester crouched to the boy's level, his voice gravelly but warm. Life doesn't always give us every answer. But if you live with kindness, the good has a way of finding you again. The boy nodded, satisfied. Something had landed. As they walked out, Baron grinned. That kid had a point. Maybe there's more to tell. Sylvester raised an eyebrow. You mean a sequel? Baron smirked. Maybe. The older man chuckled. Let's make sure we live the next part first. Then, one morning, it came. A plain envelope. No return address. Nestled in Baron's mailbox like a secret waiting to be discovered. Inside, a single sheet. Neat handwriting. No name. Dear Baron, I was on that flight. The one where you gave up your seat. I was the man beside you. You didn't know it, but I was at the edge. I had lost faith in people, and maybe in myself. But that gesture, that moment, it gave me hope. Real hope. Because of you and Mr. Stallone, I reached out to my estranged son after 10 years. And we talked. Really talked. We're rebuilding what I thought was gone forever. You reminded me of what humanity can be. You'll never know how much it meant. Thank you. A fellow traveler, with gratitude. Baron read it once. Then again. And again. Tears blurred the ink as the words soaked into him like rain into dry earth. He didn't know this man. Hadn't even noticed him. But somehow, through a simple act, he had helped save a family. One seat. One gesture. One life. Changed. He tucked the letter into a drawer. No, into a safe place. And from that day forward, he carried a copy in his wallet. Not for pride. For reminder. That kindness is never wasted. That you may never see the fruit of what you plant. But that doesn't mean it won't grow. Over lunch at the studio, Baron slid the letter across the table to Sylvester. The seasoned actor read it, slowly. His expression softened, eyes lingering on the final line. Then he tapped the page with a single, calloused finger. This, he said, voice low, firm, this is the movie. This is what it was all about. He looked up at Baron. It wasn't fiction. You sparked something real. Baron didn't speak. He couldn't. He just nodded. Because the truth didn't need many words. It only needed one. The world didn't just watch the power of one. It responded. Classrooms began screening the film during Kindness Week. Teachers turned scenes into discussion prompts. Students wrote essays not about celebrities, but about compassion. In offices, HR teams swapped icebreakers for team-building projects inspired by the film. One kind thing became a monthly ritual, a challenge to do one act of good, then pass it on. Charities reported a spike in donations. Accompanying them, handwritten notes, digital messages, and social posts tagged simply, inspired by the power of one. But the most moving reactions came not from campaigns, but from people. Baron's inbox overflowed. Letters, messages, even voice notes, stories of love rekindled, bridges rebuilt, courage found. And with every message, Baron felt it more and more. He wasn't just in a story. He was part of a movement. One afternoon, he looked across the studio at Sylvester, who was quietly scribbling in a worn leather notebook. I want to keep this going, Baron said, voice steady. What do we do next? Sylvester glanced up, smiled. Let it keep unfolding, he said simply. The story's still writing itself. Months later, Baron stood in front of a sea of faces. A glittering auditorium, chandeliers glinting like stars, press flashing cameras like lightning. He hadn't planned to speak. He hadn't even planned to stand. Sylvester had invited him to the Global Kindness Gala, an event honoring the power of one for its impact across the world. Baron assumed he'd be in the background, but Sylvester had other plans. Taking the stage with his signature grounded calm, the Hollywood icon adjusted the mic and looked out at the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, I've told a lot of stories on screen. Big ones, loud ones. But this one started quietly, with a kid who gave up his seat on a plane. He paused. The room leaned in. That small act reminded me, and reminded all of us, what it means to be human. Then he turned. Baron Trump, come up here. The applause thundered. Baron rose, his pulse pounding, as he walked to the stage. Sylvester placed a crystal sculpture in his hands, 2 hands, clasped together. A symbol of connection. Baron took a breath. I'm not used to being in the spotlight, he began, voice shaking, but clear. But I've learned something important. Kindness isn't just a choice. It's a responsibility. The crowd stilled. He continued. The world will change, and not through noise, but through small, quiet acts of love. One at a time. As the final word left his lips, the audience rose, clapping, crying, some embracing strangers beside them. But Baron didn't hear the applause. He felt the calling. The next morning, Baron and Sylvester sat side by side on a quiet bench overlooking the city. The sun painted gold on the rooftops. The night's noise was behind them, but the weight of what they'd started lingered in the air. Baron looked out over the skyline. I never imagined a single moment on a plane could lead to all this. Sylvester laughed, shaking his head. Life's funny like that. Sometimes the smallest things make the biggest difference. Baron turned. I'm serious. Do you think we've done enough? Sylvester placed a hand on his shoulder, firm, fatherly. It's not about doing enough. It's about starting something that keeps going. Baron smiled. He finally understood. Sylvester hadn't taught him how to chase fame or craft image. He had shown him how to plant seeds and trust they would grow in others. They sat in silence for a moment. Then, a spark lit behind Sylvester's eyes. You know, he said slowly, we should invite people to join us. This kindness thing, maybe it's time to spread it even more. Baron laughed, catching the wink in his mentor's eye. You mean? Yeah, exactly. Baron stood, facing the imaginary camera, the city glowing behind him like a stage. With a wink, he leaned in and said, if this story moved you, like it, share it, and tell us in the comments how you're spreading kindness. Let's keep the ripple going. They turned and walked away, side by side, 2 men, 1 story, infinite echoes. They didn't just make a movie. They lit a spark. They left behind not just a moment, but a legacy. God bless you, Sylvester said quietly as they vanished into the sunlit morning. And God bless America.